Coming up on Your Vote 2012, gay marriage, abortion, gun control, and race. Just some of the social issues that candidates and voters are debating this election season as Americans prepare to go to the polls. On this special World Channel broadcast, we'll report from the battleground state of Iowa on how social issues are impacting voting intentions in the Hawkeye State.
People care about the economy. People care about jobs. The fact that I can marry my partner is not going to tip the election either way.
We'll face the facts about the changing social dynamic in the U.S. with Frank Sesno of George Washington University. And we'll bring you a special panel discussion on whether social issues matter or take a backseat to the economy in Your Vote 2012. I'm Celeste Headley. All that coming up next right here on World Channel.
Major funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Iowa is long used to being in the national political spotlight, but that's usually in the months leading up to the state's first-in-the-nation caucuses. This time around, as a swing state in a tight presidential race, Iowa's 6 votes in the Electoral College could really matter. It's a state that was good to Barack Obama in 2008. He won the Democratic caucuses and then handily beat John McCain in the general election. This time around, with Mitt Romney running hard to win the state, some Iowa conservatives say he can secure victory by emphasizing the social issues they care about. We begin our program with a report from correspondent Anna Sale of WNYC Public Radio. She's just back from Iowa. Anna?
Celeste, the economy in Iowa is relatively robust, so the presidential candidates' positions on social issues are getting more attention as they vie for the crucial swing voters in Iowa.
You guys want a balloon?
There's been little shelter for Iowans looking to escape the constant bombardment from the 2 main political parties. In downtown Des Moines, a festival celebrating Italian-American heritage provided yet another opportunity for voter outreach this summer. Professor Dennis Goldford, a leading expert on Iowa politics, says independent voters will be crucial. He predicts that the other deciding factor here will be turnout.
Democrats have more marginal voters than Republicans. In other words, all things being equal, a Republican voter is more likely to go to the polls than a Democratic voter. So obviously the Obama campaign and Democrats generally, both in Iowa and nationwide, really hope to gear up that Democratic turnout that they had in 2008 and didn't have in 2010.
A task potentially helped by Iowa's comparatively strong economy and low unemployment rate of just over 5%, 3 points below the national average. Even so, Democrats concede that it will be hard for President Obama to replicate the atmosphere of 2008.
Do I think that the activists that supported him 4 years ago are going to be there again? Absolutely. Do I think they'll knock the doors? Absolutely. Do I think that they'll do it with the same amount of enthusiasm they did it the first time? Probably not. But I'm not sure any president could have that kind of momentum.
My big thing is...
Listen to one of Iowa's most prominent social conservatives, and it's clear that Mitt Romney also faces an enthusiasm deficit.
And where Romney has a bit of a disconnect, his record and his rhetoric has been inconsistent.
Bob Vanderplatz heads a conservative Christian group called the Family Leader. The organization didn't endorse in the Republican primaries, although Vanderplatz personally backed Rick Santorum with the blessing of the Family Leader's board. Mitt Romney was dropped from consideration at an early stage.
Today he's saying many of the right things that our base wants to hear. That's why I think he could seal the deal, show up, address our base, and tell our base why he would be America's chief champion for the family. And he's got a great family story to tell, so I think it would be right in his wheelhouse to tell it.
Bob Vanderplatz argues that if Mitt Romney were to speak out more on issues that motivate social conservatives like him, it could tip the scales his way in Iowa. This is, after all, a part of the country where a 2009 state Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage provoked a backlash.
2010, we had 3 justices up for retention who basically forced same-sex marriage on the state of Iowa. Overwhelmingly, the people of Iowa came out, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, and voted those justices off the bench. So I think this issue motivates voters, Independents and Democrats alike.
Opponents of the court decision have also turned their attention to Iowa's legislature, pushing for an amendment to the state's constitution banning same-sex marriage.
Iowa Republicans are more concerned than Republicans nationwide with same-sex marriage and abortion. It's not that Republicans nationwide aren't concerned about them, but Iowa Republicans are really particularly concerned about them.
Supporters of same-sex marriage say public sentiment in this heavily rural state is moving their way. They point to a Des Moines Register poll from earlier this year, which found that most Iowans oppose a constitutional ban. Matt McCoy is the only openly gay member of the Iowa legislature. He says the whole issue works to President Obama's advantage.
Because ultimately you've had a shift in the state of Iowa in the thinking on this issue, and I think to run against this issue as something that has been accepted as a right by the majority, I think is putting you in an awkward position as a Romney candidate trying to move the base.
The president's evolution on the issue, to the point where he now endorses same-sex marriage, is applauded by activists here at One Iowa, which advocates for gay rights.
City fundraiser. I know that
Executive Director Donna Redwing says Barack Obama has done more for their community than any other president. Even so, she doesn't expect social issues, like same-sex marriage, to define the race here.
People care about the economy. People care about jobs. The fact that I can marry my partner is not going to tip the election either way.
And you know, when it comes to politicians, I'm in the school of they pretty much all suck.
Some conservatives in Iowa agree that the economy will be the big issue. Simon Conway hosts an afternoon drive time radio show broadcasting from Des Moines. With its large audience, the show is a magnet for Republicans in search of the party's nomination. The British-born talk radio host warns listeners against what he sees as the socialist path of his native land.
Believe me, if you don't get rid of Obamacare in November, we are socialist Europe forever.
Conway doesn't think Mitt Romney would be wise to highlight social themes, saying his audience is more interested in a candidate who promotes limited government.
They want to get back to being the Americans we're supposed to be, the Americans of our founders. They want people to adhere to the Constitution. They want the government to back out of their lives.
Professor Goldford thinks Iowa's social conservatives appear unlikely to get everything they want from the Romney campaign.
The calculation is that social conservatives are certainly never going to vote for President Obama. But will they stay home because Romney doesn't say as much about social issues as they want? I think the Romney people are betting that they won't.
The Obama campaign is also working to get out its base. With the race here in Iowa so tight, even small constituencies could make a difference. Hispanics comprise slightly more than 5% of the statewide population, but the small town of West Liberty is the first place in Iowa where they're a majority. Many were drawn here by jobs at the local meat processing facility, where up to 20,000 turkeys a day are slaughtered. Jose Zacharias moved here from Mexico nearly 30 years ago. He became a U.S. citizen and is now on the city council. He's working with the Obama campaign to help mobilize and register Hispanics here in eastern Iowa. He says they're motivated by the economy, not social issues.
We need the state to spend some money to create jobs, to make incentives for the private initiative, because just cutting services, giving taxes to the wealthy is not going to make it.
Meanwhile, as the 2012 campaign plays out, visitors to the African American Museum of Iowa in Cedar Rapids can reflect on the events of 4 years ago.
The historic victory of Obama in Iowa is huge for us.
Museum Executive Director Tom Moore says it was a momentous time when a largely white Midwestern state backed an African American candidate.
There will always be challenges and issues, but the amount of progress that showed me, I think it was a barometer of racism in Iowa, and I thought it spoke well of the fact that we're not as race conscious as we've been painted, I think, at times to be.
Still, the political environment facing President Obama in Iowa looks quite different than it did in 2008.
Remember, he ran on promise last time. He's running on performance this time.
For Your Vote 2012, I'm Anna Sale.
You can see lots more of Anna Sale's reporting from Iowa and some of the other crucial battleground states online. Visit WNYC's politics blog at itsafreecountry.org. You'll find reports there from all over the nation, and there's plenty of opportunity to join the conversation. And you can join our conversation by heading over to Twitter. We want your questions and comments about gay marriage, abortion, gun control, and the other major social issues this election year. You can use the hashtag YV2012, that's YV2012, and we'll feature some of your thoughts here and on our own website at worldchannel.org. Still to come on Your Vote 2012, our special panel discussion on America's changing social dynamic and its political implications. But before we debate policies, let's take a look at some of the facts. Joining me now, veteran journalist Frank Sesno of George Washington University. He heads a new initiative there called Face the Facts USA. Frank.
Celeste, good to see you.
Nice to be with you. Let's begin with race, because I have to imagine there's going to be some votes that will be influenced by the color of the president. How many?
Well, that's a very good question. I can tell you that this is something that is of immense interest and concern in the African American community, obviously. About 95% of the African American vote went to Barack Obama in 2008. The Urban League recently put out a report that said turnout is key. They had about 65% turnout last time, but there's some concern that with a lack of enthusiasm or less enthusiasm, that number could slip. And this report said that if the number went, or the percentage of turnout went from 65 to 60, it could put several states in play, among them Colorado, Ohio, Virginia. So there's some great concern there that the get out the vote drive, the maintaining enthusiasm drive, and when it comes to race, remains key.
All right, then let's touch on gay marriage, because obviously the president came out recently in support of single-sex marriage. It's something that Romney has said he does not support. How many people will actually decide their vote based on single-sex marriage?
It's going to be something that highlights the very stark difference between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. They couldn't be farther apart on this issue. It is something that divides the country. There is not a state. There are currently 8 states where same-sex marriage is recognized, though 2 of them have ballot initiatives challenging that. But not one of those states has voted for same-sex marriage at the ballot box. They've been principally judicially driven. So this remains a very divisive social issue in this country.
Well, then let's move on to abortion, because this is something which very often does not have an effect in presidential election years. But I would imagine this year it might, simply because it could be connected to the Supreme Court, and the next president may be appointing more than one Supreme Court justice.
Again, we've got a pro-choice, pro-life divide between these candidates. So I think that what we'll be seeing here as this plays out, the fact of life is that abortion is the law of the land. Abortion rights is the law of the land in this country, but it will be this refrain that the courts remain the place where this is adjudicated, maybe even revisited or limited at times, and that both candidates are really going to be harping on that when they raise the specter, the fear factor really, of what that next president could do in the Supreme Court.
And finally, let's move on to gun control. It's obviously on a lot of people's minds. We had the shooting at the Sikh temple in Wisconsin, and of course at the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. On people's minds right now, but will it still be on their minds when they go to the ballot box?
Fact is that the FBI estimates that there are something like 200 million plus guns in this country owned by individuals. The law of the land isn't really. This is mostly, as per the Constitution, regulated by the states. 31 states, for example, don't have any kind of a permit for carrying weapons at all. You carry them where you want. Other states like California and New York tend to have more restrictions in place. But what people don't realize is that the real bulk of the voting heft on this issue lies on the pro-gun lobby side. About 4.3 million members of the NRA. That is a very powerful voting bloc, and it's why you don't hear the kind of debate over gun control in this campaign that you might certainly in other countries.
Frank Sesno, many thanks for being with us.
Celeste, it's a pleasure.
And you can learn much more about Face the Facts USA, Frank's new initiative at George Washington University, by visiting it online. The web address is easy, facethefactsusa.org. You can sign up for their Fact of the Day email, watch videos about the critical issues this election cycle, and join the conversation. Again, it's all at facethefactsusa.org. And to our panel discussion now, joining me in Washington, Lenny McAllister, Republican strategist and commentator. Also, Adele Stan, she is the Washington Bureau Chief for Alternet.org, and Farai Chidea, a political analyst who's joining us from New York. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's kind of get gun control out of the way, and the reason I just want to deal with it quickly is because it never seems to have any effect on people's votes when they get to the voting booth. Is that pretty fair, Lenny?
I don't know if it's going to be fair in 2012 with the Aurora incident, with the Texas incident, and the violence in Chicago. You're now looking at it in an issue where if the Obama administration continues to address it, he's tried his best not to talk about it too much.
It's kind of hedging his bets,
yes,
yeah.
But the more he has to bring it up, there's more of an opportunity for the conservative right to say, Second Amendment, states' rights, this is something that this administration is trying to strip away, and it starts to draw a deeper contrast between the philosophical divide.
But not likely, do you think, Adele, to change someone's vote, really?
Well, I think what you have with this election, that this is what you would call a kind of a cultural identity sort of an issue. So I don't know that it's going to change minds, but it could have an effect on, ginning up, as Lenny says, the Republican base, if there's a move to suggest greater gun control.
Well, then let's move on to an issue that, although enough people are not talking about it, will definitely change people's minds and change their votes, and that's the issue of race. Farai, I wonder what you think. Do you think people themselves are aware if they're influenced by race before they go into the ballot box?
Well, the most interesting study that I've seen was one that was using Google Insights, which is a tool that tracks what people search for. And an analysis of that found that in the last election, 2 to 3% of votes seemed to be influenced by race negatively. So if you extrapolate to this election, we don't know how many people are going to be influenced, but I do think that, you can see people searching for still, everything from whether or not the president is an American citizen to, how American he is culturally. And I do think that it will have an impact still on 2012.
I think, Lenny, it was a little unfortunate the way that the primary went, because I think perhaps it became a little too racially charged than it perhaps needed to be. Have we improved since then, do you think?
I don't know, because we're looking at 4 years past 2008. We didn't have all the stuff that was going back and forth with the 2010 Obamacare/Affordable Care Act debate and the spitting incident of 2010. We didn't have the Trayvon Martin situation of 2012. We didn't have some of the Tea Party signs from 2009. We didn't have this back and forth. We didn't have the elevation of black conservatives such as Alan West coming up in 2010 and Michael Steele of the RNC in 2009. So all of those things came after President-elect Obama took that stage in Chicago in November 2008. So now the amalgamation of all of that's going to come into play in 2012, and I do think that people are ignoring the generation gap between Mitt Romney and President Obama. There's 14 years difference between those two, and then there's a huge cultural gap between the two as well, and I think that's definitely going to come into play in the fall.
But Adele, here's the issue that could come up in ways that we don't entirely understand at this point. There are a lot of people, whether they admit it or not, who will vote against Barack Obama or vote for Mitt Romney because of his color.
Absolutely.
At the same time, there are people who came out in 2008 and supported Barack Obama partly because they wanted to be part of history, right? Mm-hmm. They wanted to help elect the first African-American president. Right. And many of them may now be disenchanted. They may stay home.
Absolutely, and I think you're really onto something there, Celeste, because my sense is that in 2008, there were actually a lot of white people who voted for Barack Obama reluctantly, and it was because the economy was tanking, and McCain seemed quite clueless, and it was tanking based on Republican policies. So are those people going to turn out for Obama this time around, with the economy still, lagging?
Although, and Farai, I wanted to get your take on this. It was very interesting to me to hear Mitt Romney, especially while he was choosing Paul Ryan as his running mate, to use words that we've heard before, things like work to welfare, which in the past have been code words for some very racially charged philosophies.
Well, absolutely. I think that Mitt Romney's choice of Paul Ryan as his running mate, Ryan is someone who basically grew up being nurtured by the American government. Quite literally, once his father passed away, he got survivor's benefits, which allowed him to pay for college. But his philosophy is very different. So I think when you have candidates throwing around words like culture of dependency and talking about welfare, there's a lot of racial code there, but I think we also need to flip the script and really talk about what other forms of dependency exist in this country.
Well, let's move on to a couple of the other social issues that we wanted to cover, and let's move on to gay marriage. Lenny, this is an election. This is for the first time public opinion has tipped over half of Americans support single-sex marriage. Do you think it'll have an influence?
It will have an influence, in part because you're looking at the Democratic Convention being in Charlotte. You had Amendment 1 just coming up in the state of North Carolina, and North Carolina was a blue state for the first time in 40 years, or about actually 32 years at the time, from Carter to Obama. That's probably not going to be a blue state this time around. They're looking at probably having their first Republican governor in 30 years.
Yeah.
They have their first Republican House of Representatives in over 100 years. So that is one swing state that President Obama was able to get that he was not going to be able to get now. If those social issues start coming into play in those key battleground states, this is something that could play against the president.
Generally, social issues don't have the #1 highest priority for voters, but this has to have some kind of influence. I mean, you look at what's happened with Chick-fil-A, you look at the way people are changing their lives based on whether the corporations, JCPenney, supports gay rights or doesn't support gay rights. Is that going to translate into a vote?
Well, it could very well translate into votes. How it affects the outcome is another thing because of the Electoral College. So when you play these issues in particular states, say in Florida or North Carolina, that's where, you know, the rubber meets the road. And I was at an Americans for Prosperity event, which is, you know, sort of the secular Tea Party, but the Chick-fil-A thing was huge there. So it's like the gun control issue. It's a base ginning issue.
Well, Farai, I wonder what you think about that, because very often people say social issues don't sway people's votes more than, say, the economy. But I wonder if social issues, as Adele is suggesting, actually motivate people to go and vote. I mean, because in the end, it could be turnout that swings this election one way or the other.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that the group to watch around social issues are white middle-class women who are, in many states, the ultimate swing voters. And in states like Florida, you have a lot of, you know, suburban and, you know, urban upper middle-class white women who are volunteering for President Obama because they are so angry at the rhetoric around issues like contraception. Women who never thought, you know, they may not have been politically energized around, you know, sort of abortion, but contraception they thought was kind of off the table circa 1950. And so I think that, you know, the gay rights issue is one thing. I definitely think that there has been an overall swing, but it could still be an issue in some states. But what I would really watch is the issue of women's rights, and particularly around contraception and some of the rhetoric we've seen in the primaries that could come to haunt the Romney-Ryan ticket.
And I have to think, Lenny, that this is something that President Obama could actually really exploit to his advantage, because the next president could nominate more than one or two Supreme Court justices. So that brings abortion really into the forefront. And that actually could be a real determination in terms of how people vote.
It could, but if we look at what was transpiring earlier this year, when the issue with the Catholic Church came up, it did not move the needle that much for President Obama. In fact, he got some blowback that he didn't anticipate. Other social issues did not move the needle that much for President Obama. The issue has become, and it goes back to what you were saying previously, the issue has been something going back to the economy, where some of these social issues get the conservative base going for a little while, get the liberal base and progressive base going for a little while, but it goes back to the economy. And I think that every single time that President Obama tries to shift the issues over towards social issues and shift the attention there, it's going to be a Romney-Ryan initiative to shift it right back to the economy and say, what does the unemployment rate look like? What does the hiring look like? How is your personal finances turning out at this point in time? These social issues are not going to be enough to make President Obama widen the gap.
Well, let's wrap up with you, Adele. I mean, I wonder if Lenny's correct. I really think Farai might be closer, that actually these issues of reproductive health, of abortion also, but just women's issues in general, perhaps the rhetoric about the war on women is really going to motivate people.
I think it's true. And, you know, Celinda Lake has always spoken of the yes, honey factor, that, you know, often women's opinions on things don't exactly show up in polls, just as, you know, attitudes on race don't. And then you're alone in the voting booth. I think that the attack on contraception, Romney picking up the rhetoric of the Catholic bishops, calling that an attack on religious freedom. I think that's going to resonate with suburban women.
Okay, so we have just a little bit of time left. We've got 4 issues here: gun control, abortion, gay marriage, and race. Lenny, which one do you think would have the most influence?
I think the one that's going to have the most influence is going to actually be race, but nobody will talk about that.
That's right. Adele?
I agree.
And Farai?
I agree, but I would also add in that Mitt Romney's religion could be his version of race, an identity issue that also defines a campaign.
Okay, that's Farai Chideya from New York. She is a political analyst. Also with us in Washington is Adele Stan. She's Washington Bureau Chief for Alternet.org. And Lenny McAllister, who is a Republican strategist and commentator. And finally, every time we approach an election and activists start pushing issues of reproductive health, gay rights, education, or gun control, some smart aleck says, it's the economy, stupid. And yes, many people will base their votes on which candidate they think can get them a job, keep their house, or rebuild their devastated 401k. But remember, it was in part the issue of gay marriage that helped get George W. Bush reelected in 2000. More and more, people are choosing what they wear, what they eat, and what they drive on social values. In the end, Americans' votes may be influenced as much by the balance in their checking accounts as the testimony of Sandra Fluck, the student who became famous when Rush Limbaugh attacked her over contraception on his radio show, or the lines at Chick-fil-A. And that's your Vote 2012 for this time. Stay tuned to World Channel for our continuing coverage of the November election, and connect with us online at worldchannel.org. I'm Celeste Headley from Washington. Goodbye.
Major funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.